9 Weirdest Unsolved Mysteries of Modern History. Here are the 9 weirdest and most bizarre unsolved mysteries from World War II, and be warned, some of them are extremely freaky. 1. The list of British soldiers at Auschwitz. In a mystery that only came to light more than 60 years after the end of World War II, in 2009 a list was discovered during excavations at Auschwitz concentration camp that held the name of 17 British soldiers, who were believed to have been POWs. With surnames including Osborne, Lawrence, and Gardner on the list, 8 of the 17 British names had ticks next to them. Some believe this refers to the fact that 8 of them had been successfully executed along with many other British soldiers from E715 camp, but others are not as convinced. German words since then, never, and now also appear on the list, and this has led many to the conclusion that the men were in fact members of the British SS division, who fought alongside the Nazis and the Axis powers against the Allies during World War II. Neither theory has been proven conclusively, but the secrecy of the list suggests something is not quite right about it. The details, which were found during routine preservation work at the concentration camp, has puzzled researchers who have no clue how it came to be there. Experts are divided over the list, with some claiming the names belong to former Jewish prisoners of war who were sent to die at the camp. Others say they could have belonged to a British SS division that fought alongside the Nazis in World War II. Polish authorities are now seeking to gain access to British archives in a bid to help solve the mystery. The document is a piece of white celluloid with 17 surnames handwritten in pencil in block letters, while a list of numbers sits on the top right-hand corner of the same page. Polish historian Dominik Sinowick, who found the document, told the Austrian Times that the list's origins was a complete mystery. Sinowick said he was looking for something else entirely when he stumbled on the document. The Krakow-based historian found the names lying under debris inside a bunker located on the site of the Nazi German Auschwitz prisoner of war camp, which held mainly British prisoners. They were clearly the names of English soldiers, we presume prisoners of war, but we want to try and find out more about them and want British help to do so, he said. The surnames include Osborne, Lawrence and Gardner, and beside 8 of the 17 names is a tick. On the rear of the list somebody has written common German words with the English translations. It includes the words now, never and since then. Polish authorities have reportedly asked for permission to search British military archives for clues about the document. Piotr Setkwicz, an expert from the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, confirmed the document's authenticity. Auschwitz-Birkenau was one of the largest concentration camps in Nazi-occupied Poland, where more than 1 million people were killed. 90% of those who were sent to the notorious extermination camp were Jews who were gassed, starved and worked to death. Last week a separate list of Auschwitz prisoners emerged, after workers found it packed inside a bottle which was fixed in the mortar of a wall of a building. The building was part of a local high school and had served as a warehouse for Nazi camp guards. 2. Flight 19's disappearance over the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle's reputation as a boat and plane-devouring chasm was first sealed in December 1945, when a group of 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers known as Flight 19 vanished in the Atlantic off the coast of Florida. No sign of the Avengers was ever found, and a Navy seaplane sent to rescue them also disappeared without a trace. Take a look back at one of the most perplexing mysteries in aviation history. It began as nothing more than a routine training flight. At 2:10 p.m. on December 5, 1945, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers took off from a naval air station in Ft. Lauderdale, Florida. The planes, collectively known as Flight 19, were scheduled to tackle a 3-hour exercise, known as Navigation Problem Number 1. Their triangular flight plan called for them to head east from the Florida coast, and conduct bombing runs at a place called Hens and Chickens Shoals. They would then turn north and proceed over Grand Bahama Island, before changing course a 3rd time and flying southwest back to base. Save for one plane that only carried 2 men, each of the Avengers was crewed by 3 Navy men or Marines, most of whom had logged around 300 hours in the air. The flight's leader was Lieutenant Charles C. Tailor, an experienced pilot and veteran of several combat missions in World War II's Pacific Theater. At first, Flight 19's hop proceeded just as smoothly as the previous 18 that day. Tailor and his pilots buzzed over hens and chickens shoals around 2:30 p.m. and dropped their practice bombs without incident. But shortly after the patrol turned north for the second leg of its journey, something very strange happened. For reasons that are still unclear, Tailor became convinced that his Avenger's compass was malfunctioning, and that his planes had been flying in the wrong direction. The troubles only mounted after a front blew in, and brought rain, gusting winds and heavy cloud cover. Flight 19 became hopelessly disoriented. "I don't know where we are," one of the pilots said over the radio. "We must have got lost after that last turn." Lieutenant Robert F. Cox, another Navy flight instructor who was flying near the Florida coast, was the first to overhear the patrol's radio communications. He immediately informed the air station of the situation, and then contacted the Avengers to ask if they needed assistance. "Both my compasses are out and I'm trying to find Ft. Lauderdale, Florida," Tailor said, his voice sounding anxious. "I'm overland, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down." Tailor's claim didn't seem to make sense. He'd made his scheduled pass over hens and chicken shoals in the Bahamas less than an hour earlier, but he now believed his planes had somehow drifted hundreds of miles off course and ended up in the Florida Keys. The 27-year-old had just transferred to Fort Lauderdale from Miami, and many have since speculated that he may have confused some of the islands of the Bahamas for the Keys. Under normal circumstances, pilots lost in the Atlantic were supposed to point their planes toward the setting sun, and fly west toward the mainland, but Tailor had become convinced that he might be over the Gulf of Mexico. Hoping to locate the Florida Peninsula, he made a fateful decision to steer Flight 19 northeast, a course that would only take them even farther out to sea. Some of his pilots seemed to have recognized that he was making a mistake. "Damn it," one man griped over the radio. "If we would just fly west, we would get home." Tailor was eventually persuaded to turn around and head west, but shortly after 6 p.m., he seems to have cancelled the order and once again changed direction. "We didn't go far enough east," he said, still worried that he might be in the Gulf. "We may as well just turn around and go east again." His pilots probably argued against the decision. Some investigators even believe that one plane broke off and flew in a different direction, but most followed their commander's lead. Flight 19's radio transmissions soon became increasingly faint as it meandered out to sea. When fuel began to run low, Tailor was heard prepping his men for a potential crash landing in the ocean. "All planes close up tight," he said. "We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together." A few minutes later, the Avengers' last radio communications were replaced by an eerie buzz of static. The Navy immediately scrambled search planes to hunt for the missing patrol. Around 7:30 p.m., a pair of PBM Mariner flying boats took off from an air station north of Ft. Lauderdale. Just 20 minutes later, however, one of them seemed to follow Flight 19's lead by suddenly vanishing off radar. The remains of the Mariner and its 13 crewmen were never recovered, but it's commonly believed that the seaplane exploded shortly after takeoff. Flying boats were notoriously accident-prone, and were even nicknamed flying gas tanks for their propensity for catching fire. Suspicions that the seaplane may have gone up in flames were all but confirmed by a passing merchant ship, which spotted a fireball and found evidence of an oil slick in the ocean. At first light the next day, the Navy dispatched more than 300 boats and aircraft to look for Flight 19, and the missing Mariner. The search party spent 5 days combing through more than 300,000 square miles of territory, to no avail. "They just vanished," Navy Lieutenant David White later recalled. "We had hundreds of planes out looking, and we searched over land and water for days, and nobody ever found the bodies or any debris." A Navy Board of Investigation was also left scratching its head. While it argued that Tailor might have confused the Bahamas for the Florida Keys after his compasses malfunctioned, it could find no clear explanation for why Flight 19 had become so disoriented. Its members eventually attributed the loss to causes or reasons unknown. The strange events of December 5, 1945 have since become fodder for all manner of wild theories and speculation. In the 1960s and 70s, pulp magazines and writers such as Vincent Gaddis and Charles Berlitz helped popularize the idea that Flight 19 had been gobbled up by the Bermuda Triangle, a section of the Atlantic supposedly known for its high volume of freak disappearances and mechanical failures. Other books and fictional portrayals have suggested that magnetic anomalies, parallel dimensions and alien abductions might have all played a role in the tragedy. In 1977, the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind famously depicted Flight 19 as having been whisked away by flying saucers and later deposited in the deserts of Mexico. Even if the Lost Patrol didn't fall victim to the supernatural, there's no denying that its disappearance was accompanied by many oddities and unanswered questions. Perhaps the strangest of all concerns Lieutenant Tailor. Witnesses later claimed that he arrived to Flight 19's pre-exercise briefing several minutes late and requested to be excused from leading the mission. "I just don't want to take this one out," he supposedly said. Just why Tailor tried to get out of flying remains a mystery, but it has led many to suggest that he may have not been fit for duty. Also unexplained is why none of the members of Flight 19 made use of the rescue radio frequency or their plane's ZBX receivers, which could have helped lead them toward Navy radio towers on land. The pilots were told to switch the devices on, but they either didn't hear the message or didn't acknowledge it. What really happened to Flight 19? The most likely scenario is that the planes eventually ran out of gas and ditched in the ocean somewhere off the coast of Florida, leaving any survivors at the mercy of rough seas and deep water. In 1991, a group of treasure hunters seemed to have finally solved the puzzle when they stumbled upon the watery graves of 5 World War II-era Avengers near Fort Lauderdale. Unfortunately, it was later found that the hulks belonged to a different group of Navy planes whose serial numbers didn't match those of the fabled Lost Patrol. Many believe the wrecks of Flight 19 and its doomed rescue plane may still lurk somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle, but while the search continues to this day, no definitive signs of the 6 aircraft or their 27 crewmen have ever been found. 3. What happened to the Bloodfan flag? The case of the Bloodfan is a curious one, seeing as the actual existence of the legendary and sacred Nazi flag has been disputed, never mind what became of it. Supposedly the swastika flag, designed by Hitler himself, became such a key Nazi symbol when a white flag bearing the symbol, in the center was carried and then covered in blood, during Hitler's attempted beer hall putsch in Munich in November 1923. Carried by the SA, they were halted by Munich police, and placed the flag on the floor, before some Nazi blood was shed on it during the resultant armed conflict. In the most often used version of the events of the Bloodfan flag, supposedly the wounded flag bearer Heinrich Trambayer gathered up the blood-soaked relic, ran off to a friend's house and then hid it in his jacket. Then Hitler was allegedly given the flag, now attached to a new staff with a decorative finial and silver sleeve commemorating the 16 Nazis that died during the beer hall putsch, after being released from Lenzburg prison. When the National Socialists staged the Munich putsch, on November 9, 1923, one of the leading units in the NSDAP column was the 6th Company of Sturmabteilung, SA, Regiment Mugen, recently awarded its own swastika flag. The 6th Company commander had appointed some man Heinrich Trambayer to carry the unit colors on the march. As the column reached the Feldherrn, the uniformed police blocking the route raised their rifles and opened fire on the National Socialists. Marching next to flag bearer Trambayer was NSA activist called Andreas Boridl. Boridl was mortally wounded by the first volley of rifle fire, and collapsed on top of Trambayer, who had thrown himself onto the ground as soon as the police began shooting. The flag was trapped under the body of the dying Boridl, and it was already covered in blood. Heinrich Trambayer dragged the flag free and, desperate to escape arrest or worse, scrambled to his feet and, carrying the flag, ran back up the street and disappeared into the narrow side streets. Trambayer saw it as his duty to save the flag from being seized by the authorities and took shelter in the house of a friend, Herr Ziegler. Together they stripped the flag from its pole and Trambayer left the house with the folded flag hidden inside his coat. Ziegler hid the flagpole in his house. The blood-stained flag was taken from house to house, and hidden by different NS men and women in Munich until 1926, when it was returned to Adolf Hitler personally by some activist Karl Eggers. The flag was now awarded a special status as a surviving relic of the November 9 putsch. In addition, the fabric of the flag bore the damage of bullet holes from the shooting and was stained by the blood of at least one of the Munich martyrs. The flag was named the Bloodfan, the blood flag. The damage was never repaired and never cleaned. Adolf Hitler arranged for a special flagpole to be designed for it, with a silver sleeve around their staff carrying the names of 3 of the Munich dead who had belonged to the 6th Company of the Regiment Mugen. At an Stab rally in the city of Weimar on July 4, 1926, the Führer presented the blood flag to the recently formed SS, and its standard bearer was Heinrich Trambeer, now a member of the SS, marked out as a survivor of the Munich Putsch and later awarded the honor of Altkämpfer. From 1927 until the outbreak of the Second World War, the blood flag was always used in the rituals of consecrating new banners and standards for the NSDAP, SA and SS. All newly awarded standards were touched by the flag cloth of the blood flag, thereby connecting the new colors with the sacrifice of the men of November 1923. The ceremony was always conducted by Adolf Hitler himself. The blood flag was held by the standard bearer, and the Führer took the cloth in his right hand to perform the ritual of consecration. The original standard bearer Heinrich Trambeer had by now become increasingly unwell, after suffering a fractured skull and other serious injuries in a street battle with communists. The honor and role of standard bearer of the blood flag was passed to another NSDAP veteran of the Munich SS and close comrade of Trambeer, Jacob Grimminger. From around 1929 onwards, Jacob Grimminger acted as standard bearer until the end in May 1945. The blood flag always had place of honor at rallies and ceremonies across the 1930s, and when not being carried in public was always stored on public display at the national offices of the NSDAP in Munich, the Brown House. Mystery surrounds the fate of the blood flag, after late 1944/early 1945. All historical sources agree that in late 1944, the blood flag was removed from the NSDAP headquarters, the Brown House in Munich, to a safer place, then according to some sources, was moved again in the early spring of 1945. After the collapse of the Third Reich in May 1945, this most important symbol of German National Socialism disappeared. Certainly the Allied occupation forces were keen to track it down, and the standard bearer Jacob Grimminger was interrogated several times by American military intelligence personnel about the location of the blood flag, an element of post-1945 mythology grew up around the hiding place of this iconic NS banner. One American writer suggested that it was hidden away in South America, smuggled out by U-boat with other meaningful treasures of the NSDAP and locked away in a bank vault in Santiago, Chile. In the myths and rumors about the fate of Reichsleiter Martin Bormann, some journalists and fantasists claim the flag was taken to South America by Bormann, and hung on the wall of his secret hideout in the jungles of Paraguay. Elements of the film The Boys from Brazil in Too Much Imagination. The writer of this blog was once told by a former Waffen-SS officer, that the blood flag was certainly not in South America, but was safe in a secret place either in Germany or Austria, but he refused to say anything more about it. A former member of the Hitler Youth told the author, that he had been told by an Alterkämpfer that the blood flag was safe in Europe, and its location was known only to a trusted few and their descendants. In the post-war years, a number of wealthy private collectors of Third Reich memorabilia have tried unsuccessfully to track the flag down, motivated by a combination of personal interest and financial considerations. There is no doubt that if the blood flag was to emerge onto the collector's market, it would fetch a huge price in the auction rooms. However, the blood flag has far more meaning to what some call the true believers, than a sale room price tag. Of course, there are also those elements who would seek at the blood flag to either spirit it away for permanent display in the museum at Yad Vashem in Israel, or else seize it and publicly destroy it as a symbolic triumph over National Socialism. One day perhaps, when sanity has been restored to European politics, the blood flag will be taken out of hiding and will return to Munich to be displayed with honor. The Northland Forum would be interested to hear of any other accounts of the blood flag that are circulating out there. 4. The Russian Amber Room. After 60 years of hunting for the missing Amber Room, a magnificent treasure stolen by the Nazis, a museum in Poland suggests that they know where is it located. This is the second time within a year that rumors have run rampant about the treasure being located in Poland. The Mamerki Museum near Wrocław, in northeast Poland, is one of the most interesting forts related to World War II. The area is still full of secrets, and perhaps a hidden treasure. According to TVN24, this place has also been connected with the legendary Amber Room, which was created for the Russian Tsar Peter the Great in the 1700s. The museum in Mamerki, In German, Mauerwald recently reported that they have discovered an unknown room measuring 3 meters, 9.84 feet, long, and 2 meters, 6.56 feet, wide. Using georadar, they say that they've found a secret hidden place located inside an old wartime bunker. The Amber Room was stolen by the Nazis, and was allegedly on its way to becoming one of Adolf Hitler's greatest treasures when it was lost. The Amber Room originally contained 450 kilograms, 992.08 pounds, of amber decorated with gold, pieces of art, jewels, and mirrors. It was located in St. Petersburg from the times of Peter the Great, until the day when the Nazis dismantled it and decided to transport it to Königsberg Castle, Kaliningrad, which was controlled by them at the time. It was during this transport that it was said to have accidentally disappeared. Strangely enough, the documentation connected with the transport was lost too. The suggestion that the Amber Room may be hidden in Mamurki is just one of the hypotheses related to the Amber Room's location, but the researchers are convinced that it is much more. As Bartłomiej Plewenczyk from the museum told Mail Online, "We think there is a very good chance that the Amber Room is here for a number of reasons. Of course there were no such devices as ground-penetrating radar in the 1950s, so examining and finding hidden spaces wasn't possible. Inside may be elements of the Amber Chamber, but also other looted art. But there is no doubt that the room was created specifically for the purpose of treasure." Evidence for the hypothesis comes from a former Nazi guard who told Polish soldiers in the 1950s, that during the winter of 1944 he saw trucks driving up to the bunker. The trucks were said to have been heavily guarded and they left their large cargo in Mamurki. At the time, the Polish bomb squads looked for proof, but they didn't find anything. The mysterious room where the treasure is thought to be, will be opened during the next few weeks. In 1982, the Russians started to build a replica of the Amber Room. After 20 years, visitors to Catherine Palace, near St. Petersburg, can enjoy the beauty of this incredible place once again. Nonetheless, the obsession of treasure hunters in discovering the real Amber Room is still prevalent. During the last 60 years, many of them have lost their lives or suffered from health problems by searching for it. In August 2015, Ancient Origins reported that treasure hunters claim to have identified a legendary Nazi train packed with gold and other treasure, hidden in a long-forgotten tunnel in the Polish mountains. It was said that the train may also contain the long-lost Amber Room. However, it seems to be unlikely that the train will be explored in the near future. Some of the experts suggested that this location may not even contain a train at all. Apart from this, there are many other possible hypotheses about the current location of the Amber Room. Some researchers believe that the Amber Room has never left Kaliningrad, and it is buried in the ruins of the city. Another idea says that it was transported on one of two ships, the Stubinor Wilhelm Gustloff. Both of them sank in the Baltic Sea during World War II. Yet another hypothesis claims that the Amber Room is located in a hidden place somewhere in Russia. In the 1990s, newspapers in Poland and Russia quoted eyewitnesses who swore that they saw the real Amber Room in the house of one of the noble Russians. This rumor has never been confirmed. Finally, some people also believe that they can find the Amber Room in Germany. For example, an amateur group of treasure hunters hopes to find it in the city of Wuppertal. 5. The Foo Fighters. Most people may know the Foo Fighters as a Seattle rock band founded by Nirvana drummer Dave Grohl, but the term was actually first used by Allied aircraft pilots, during the Second World War to describe unidentified flying objects, UFOs. Originally coined by the U.S. 415th Night Fighter Squadron, to report any UFO sightings during World War II, it became formal military language from November 1944. As well as referring to UFOs spotted over the European and Pacific battlefields, the term could also be applied to any mysterious aerial phenomena, such as the strange objects flying past the planes in the picture above. Toward the end of World War II, mission updates from the 415th Night Fighter Squadron took a mysterious turn. Along with details of dogfights over the German-occupied Rhine Valley, pilots began reporting inexplicable lights following their aircraft. One night in November 1944, a Bristol Beaufighter crew, pilot Edward Schlitter, radar observer Donald J. Myers, and intelligence officer Fred Ringwald was flying along the Rhine north of Strasbourg. They described seeing 8 to 10 bright orange lights off the left wing, flying through the air at high speed. Neither the airborne radar nor ground control registered anything nearby. Schlitter turned toward the lights and they disappeared, the report continued. Later they appeared farther away. The display continued for several minutes and then disappeared. Myers gave these objects a name, taking a nonsense word used by characters in the popular Smokey Stover firefighter cartoon, Foo Fighters. Reports kept coming in. The objects flew alongside aircraft at 200 miles per hour, they were red, or orange, or green, they appeared singly or with as many as 10 others in formation, and they often outmaneuvered the airplanes they were chasing. They never showed up on radar. Richard Seibart, historian for the nearby 417th Night Fighter Squadron, heard many of the stories directly from the 415th crew members. The pilots were very professional. They gave the report, talked about the lights, but didn't speculate about them. Still, the pilots found the sightings unnerving. Scared shitless was how a 415th pilot described feeling to Keith Chester, author of Strange Company, Military Encounters with UFOs in World War II. At the end of the year, an Associated Press war correspondent, Robert C. Wilson, celebrated New Year's Eve with the 415th. The next day, his story on the Foo Fighters was featured on the front page of newspapers across the country. Other squadrons had seen them, but it was the number, consistency, and impact on the 415th crews, and the fact that a reporter listened to the airmen, that finally prompted investigations into the sightings. Amateur psychologists, military aviation buffs, and conspiracy theorists offered explanations, but none that the airmen found credible. They didn't believe they were hallucinating because of battle fatigue. And because the lights caused no damage, the pilots doubted they came from remote-controlled German secret weapons. Street almost fire, a discharge of light from sharp objects and electrical fields, seemed unlikely, since the Foo Fighters exhibited such extreme maneuverability. Eventually the Army Air Command sent officers to investigate, but their research was lost after the war, Chester reported. In 1953, the CIA convened a panel of 6 top scientists familiar with experimental aviation technology to determine if the lights constituted a national security threat. The Robertson panel, named for its chair, Caltech physicist Howard P. Robertson, offered no official conclusion. Seibart, the historian, offered no explanation either, only an insight. "I think the Foo Fighters didn't show up on radar because they were plain light," he said. Radar had to have a solid object. If there was any bogey out there, the pilots would absolutely be able to tell. Author Renato Vesco remained convinced that it was a Nazi secret weapon, however, and claimed Foo Fighters were a ground-launched automatically guided jet-propelled flak mine named the Foo Ball, although nothing was ever proven. It is unlikely that a definitive explanation will ever be found. 6. The fate of Raoul Wallenberg. In the waning days of World War II, 1939 to 1945, Raoul Wallenberg, 1912, c. 1947, a Swedish businessman turned diplomat based in Budapest, was responsible for the rescue of thousands. Some estimates are as high as 100,000 of Hungarian Jews, from extermination by the Nazis. Wallenberg handed out protective passports and set up safe houses for Jews, among other life-saving measures. In January 1945, he was detained by Soviet forces for reasons unknown, somewhere outside of Budapest, and never heard from again. Years later, Soviet officials admitted to taking Wallenberg into custody, but stated he had died of a heart attack in a Moscow prison in 1947. In the ensuing decades, various sources claim that Wallenberg was still alive and being held by the Russians. While his exact fate remains a mystery, Raoul Gustav Wallenberg is considered a humanitarian hero of World War II, having saved up to 60,000 Jews from Nazi-occupied Hungary during the Holocaust, offering them fake passports and shelter, as well as providing food, soup kitchens, and hospitals to those threatened with death camps. Yet when the Soviets advanced through Eastern Europe, liberating the region country by country, the Swedish businessman was arrested by the Red Army during the siege of Budapest on suspicion of espionage. Although the Soviets claimed that Wallenberg had died in his cell at the KGB's Lubyanka prison on July 17, 1947, this account appears flimsy at best. Their explanatory document read, "I report that the prisoner Wallenberg, who is well known to you, died suddenly in his cell this night, probably as a result of a heart attack or heart failure. Pursuant to the instructions given by you that I personally have Wallenberg under my care, I request approval to make an autopsy with a view to establishing cause of death. I have personally notified the minister, and it has been ordered that the body be cremated without autopsy." Most remained unconvinced by this explanation, and in 1991 the Russian government tasked Vyacheslav Nikonov to investigate Wallenberg's death. The investigation concluded that the Swede was likely executed at Lubyanka in 1947, possibly via the C2 poison, carbolamines choline chloride, that was being tested by the Soviet secret services at the time, and that was why the body was cremated pre-autopsy. As the decades passed, various unconfirmed reports from released Soviet prisoners, and others surfaced regarding Wallenberg's fate, with some claiming the Swedish humanitarian was still alive and in Soviet custody. By the late 1970s, and early 1980s, Wallenberg's heroism and the mystery surrounding his disappearance had earned international notoriety. Believing him to still be living, some humanitarian organizations and individuals, including many whose lives were spared because of his valor, spearheaded a movement to have him released by the Russians and relocated to the US. In the meantime, Wallenberg was showered with worldwide tributes. In 1981, US President Ronald Reagan, 1911 to 2004, signed legislation naming Wallenberg an honorary American citizen, a mark of distinction that until that time had been earned only by Winston Churchill, 1874 to 1965. In 1991, Boris Yeltsin, 1931 to 2007, the Russian president, formed a commission to investigate the Wallenberg case. No new evidence was unearthed. 4 years later, a bust of Wallenberg was displayed in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. In 1997, the U.S. Postal Service honored Wallenberg by issuing a stamp featuring his likeness. In December 2000, Russia officially admitted Soviet forces had wrongfully held Wallenberg at a Soviet prison, according to the New York Times. However, Russia's announcement did not provide any definitive details about the cause of the diplomat's death. According to the Times, it is generally accepted that Wallenberg was executed in 1947 in a Soviet prison. 7. Who turned Anne Frank in? It was an anonymous phone call in the hot summer of 1944, which led the Gestapo and Dutch security police to the concealed annex in a canal-side house, where Anne Frank and her family had hidden for almost 2 years. For almost 60 years, the identity of that informant, whose call had such tragic consequences, has remained a mystery to historians and the most dogged Nazi hunters. But Dutch government historians disclosed yesterday that 2 new theories about who betrayed 15-year-old Jewish schoolgirl Anne Frank to the Nazis in occupied Amsterdam are so compelling that they are reopening their investigations. During the next 6 months, a team of experts from the Netherlands Institute for War Documentation, NID, will pore over government records drawn up at the end of the war which detail the extent of Dutch collaboration with the Nazis. They will also scrutinize the letters of Anne's father, Otto, for clues and examine police transcripts of interviews dating back to the 1940s. Not even the arresting officer questioned after the war by Simon Wiesenthal, the Austrian Nazi hunter, could say who the caller was, and investigators are convinced that no written record of the caller's identity exists. Almost everyone involved with the case is dead, and many historians believe that it is simply impossible to identify the culprit, who betrayed the young girl whose poignant diary subsequently sold more than 31 million copies and made her one of the Holocaust's most famous victims. This is not the first time that hopes of unlocking the mystery have been raised. For decades, suspicion centered on a man called Willem van Maren, who worked in the warehouse attached to the Franks' hiding place. But 2 police investigations, one immediately after the war and another in the 1960s, turned up nothing, and Van Maren died in 1971 professing his innocence. However, the 2 new theories, painstakingly researched by a British and an Austrian author, and presented in separate books, have raised hopes once again, and the NID is about to discover whether either of the scenarios stands up to close scrutiny. The first theory, forwarded by British author and Anne Frank expert Carol Ann Lee, in her book The Hidden Life of Otto Frank, seems to have aroused the most interest. The book, released in English yesterday, points the finger of blame at a man called Anton Allers, a business associate of Otto's and a committed Nazi. It claims that Allers, then a 26-year-old petty thief, had fallen on hard times by 1944 and desperately needed the bounty paid to Dutch civilians who exposed Jews in their midst. Allers was a member of the Dutch Nazi NSB movement, appeared in Nazi propaganda films, and was thrown out of his lodgings after his landlady discovered a swastika flag on the wall, and a uniform bearing SS insignia hanging in his wardrobe. It has been proven beyond doubt, says Emsley, that Allers knew where the Franks were hiding, and even his own family believed that he is the traitor. His own mother said he had a bad character from birth, and that he was always parading his Nazi connections, the author told The Guardian yesterday. He was a Dutch Nazi, a well-known traitor and an anti-Semite, and was very anti-Jewish. He needed the money and he needed the authorities' protection, because his own business had gone bankrupt. I think he is the one who gave away the Franks' whereabouts to the caller, although I don't think he physically made the call himself. That, Emsley suggests, is more likely to have been a man called Martin Cooper, who made a living from the betrayal of Jews and who moved into Allers' flat with him the day before the raid. Emsley also claims that Allers was blackmailing Otto, first in 1941 by threatening to release a letter which would have led to his deportation, and astonishingly after the war too, and even as recently as 1980 when Otto died. Allers had discovered, says Lee, that Otto's herb and food preservative business had supplied the Wehrmacht throughout the war, and that, she suggests, would have been enough to see Otto branded a collaborator. Allers himself was jailed for collaboration after the war, and bizarrely Otto wrote letters to the authorities pleading for his release. The second theory, put forward by Austrian writer Melissa Muller, has a cleaning lady in the warehouse, Lena Hardig, as the traitor. Lena had already lost her son in the war, the theory goes, and her husband worked for Otto's food preservatives firm. Her motive for betrayal, according to Muller, was that she did not want to lose her husband too, and he would have been deported for aiding the Franks if they were discovered, which she believed was only a matter of time. Both theories are being given equal weight by David Barnew, the historian charged with establishing the truth. There's no smoking gun, but we are going to make a comparison of the two theories and see what we can rule out and in. I take both of these theories seriously enough to put them on paper, but that is different from actually saying what happened. Emsley is also cautious but believes the secret of who shopped Anne Frank is there to be unearthed. The NIB has never tried to find out who betrayed the Franks, but they have contacts which I don't have, and know how archives in the Netherlands work. This is highly significant, and even if they don't find who the traitor was, the scope to find out exactly what did happen is enormous. War Diary of Life in Hiding became world bestseller. The Diary of Anne Frank, first published in English in 1952 as The Diary of a Young Girl, is one of the most widely read books in the world. It has been translated into around 67 languages and has sold over 31 million copies. The diary was given to Anne on her 13th birthday, just weeks before she and her family went into hiding in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam. The house where she and her family hid in a sealed-off room at Prinsengracht 263 in central Amsterdam was turned into a museum in 1960, and receives almost 1 million visits a year, mainly from the US. In the immediate aftermath of the war, Otto, Anne's father, had trouble finding a publisher for the diary, and was told that nobody wanted to read about the Holocaust. A Dutch newspaper, Het Parool, printed a story about Anne's diary which aroused the interest of a publishing house. In June 1947, 1,500 copies of the Dutch edition of the diary were produced. Within several of years the book had been translated into German, French and English, and was made into a film in 1959. In April 1944 Anne wrote, "One day this terrible war will be over. The time will come when we will be people again and not just Jews. We can never be just Dutch, or just English, or whatever, we will always be Jews as well. But then we'll want to be." 8. Rommel's underwater treasure. German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was one of the most high-profile Nazi generals during World War II, and he was so dedicated to the state that he attempted to hide treasure, when he began to fear the worst during 1944. Supposedly, Rommel gave 4 SS divers 6 steel ammunition boxes containing German treasure, including 440 pounds gold bullion, silver, precious stones, artwork, and jewelry, and they buried it somewhere under the sea. Although no one is entirely sure of its whereabouts, many believe it is in one of the many underwater caverns located off the eastern coast of the Mediterranean island of Corsica. In all, it is believed the treasure would be worth at least £20 million, and that is a conservative estimate. British investigators claim to have discovered a code on the back of a photograph of a German soldier with his parents, and they believe this could lead them to Rommel's treasure. The coordinates suggest it is located just off Marana Beach, which is less than a mile from the Corsican port of Bastia. This mystery could be close to being solved some 70 years on, after all. 9. Adolf Hitler's Führer Globe. The Führer Globe, or the Columbus Globe for state and industry leaders, was a globe specifically designed for Nazi leader Adolf Hitler, although his most prized one has never been discovered. Made famous by Charlie Chaplin throwing about an inflatable replica in The Great Dictator, Hitler commissioned at least 2 expensive globes, with wooden bases to be made by the Columbus factory, but the one he kept in the new Reich Chancellery was never found by the Allies. Replicas and other Nazi globes exist, including some with Germany bullet holed, almost certainly by Soviet or American soldiers, but the iconic Hitler globe has an unknown whereabouts. Soviet Minister of Internal Affairs Lavrentiy Beria was the first to inspect the Reich Chancellery once the Red Army had captured Berlin, and it is possible that he took the globe to the KGB headquarters at Lubyanka. It could still remain there, but the KGB, and now the FSB, refused to confirm or deny this. Interestingly, a globe was discovered by an American soldier among the ruins of Hitler's Eagle's Nest complex near the Bavarian Alps, although it is believed to be too small to have been the Führer globe. This globe was sold for £68,000, $100,000, in 2007, but exactly what happened to the Hitler globe will almost certainly never be known.